We're working our way through the book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible. As I always tell you, I've been told it's not the oldest book. It just happens to record the oldest events. They tell me that Job is the oldest book. Okay, I don't know how they prove that, but nonetheless, we are in Genesis. We are in the 21st chapter. We've been working our way through the 21st chapter. We've been working our way through the life of Abraham, and now I think we're at the peak of Abraham's life. We're up to verse 14 of Genesis 21. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm reading out of the King James. Please follow along in the Bible that's in front of you. If you don't have a Bible in front of you or you get lost a little bit, just look up at the screen and Catherine has the notes up there. Genesis 21:14. I'm reading from the King James. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder. The word actually means the neck or between the shoulders, so it's better that it's the back. Hagar gave it unto Hagar and putting it on her shoulder, on her back, and the child, and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, once again, we are presented with an opportunity to get emotionally into a biblical story. And I think we need to do that every opportunity we're given. These are human stories. Human beings in situations that look very familiar to what you and I go through every day. No, not too many of us have to send our firstborn out of the house, but we do regularly find ourselves in difficult family situations. We often have to make tough decisions for the good of the household. Now, this is such a heart-wrenching story. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, this is one of those verses where we have to fill in a few gaps. But let me give you my standard warning. Since we will be going outside the literal reading of what's here, anything we come up with cannot be relied on as fact, no matter how confident we are in its accuracy. Now, what we're going to discuss, the things we're going to speculate on are not all that heavy. This isn't threatening anyone's doctrine or belief system. But what we are going to do is address a few things just to make sure we get as complete of an understanding as possible of what God is saying. Now, what strikes me right away, and probably the same for you, the thing that has me a little bit confused is, first of all, these provisions Abraham offered the family. My first impression is that what he's handing over seems so obviously inadequate. They're going to be traveling through a very inhospitable and expansive desert-like region, which is actually located on the southern border of what we now know as Israel. And they're going to be traveling through that region with only some bread and what's surely nothing more than an animal skin filled with water. Certainly, I thought at first this couldn't be a serious attempt to help his second family. It seemed like nothing more than going through the motions. Maybe he figured giving them something for their journey is better than giving them nothing, even though what he did offer on the surface wouldn't be of much help for very long. At least that's the way we interpret it. And this just didn't sit well with me. It's not that I'm judging Abraham, but it just seemed glaringly unbalanced. He's a loving father, even to that punky teenager Ishmael. Despite the fact that we really don't know much about his feelings toward Hagar. She is the mother of his son, and his son is still at an age where his mother is important to his survival. So at the very least, we'd expect Abraham would assist Hagar as much as he could, if for no other reason than the sake of the boy. The picture I was perceiving from verse 14 was not matching up. So you know what I did? I investigated. I didn't doubt. I didn't get discouraged because it seemed to me that the Bible was being inconsistent. I sought a resolution to my dissonance. And listen, after only a brief bit of research, I found what I think is a good answer in one of the standard commentaries I consult all the time. Adam Clarke, I believe, has the right take on this. So instead of summarizing, I'm just going to read it to you. These are very good ideas that he's come up with, and he deserves full credit for them. And the best way to give someone full credit is to quote them directly. These are Adam Clarke's words taken from his commentary on Genesis 14. Quote, and we have them on the screen as well. By the word bread, we are to understand the food or provisions which were necessary for her and Ishmael till they should come to the place of their destination, which no doubt Abraham particularly pointed out. The bottle, which was made of skin, ordinarily goat skin, contained water sufficient to last them till they should come to the next well, which it is likely Abraham particularly specified also. This well, it appears, Hagar missed, and therefore wandered about in the wilderness, seeking more water till all she had brought with her was expended. We may therefore safely presume that she and her son were sufficiently provided for their journey had they not missed their way. Though the Bible doesn't tell us this explicitly, we can be fairly sure Abraham intended to provide all his little family would need for their entire journey through that whole region. And we can also safely assume that he gave them enough barter or money or whatever the equivalent would be so that along the way they could procure whatever they needed for each leg of the long journey. Certainly they would be splitting it up. This would be the most efficient way for two people to traverse long distances through hostile territory. You and I do that all the time, right? If we're driving to Florida, we're going to stop along the way to refill our provisions. That's what was supposed to happen to these two, taking only what they need until they reach the next supply point. When you're in the desert, you don't want to carry a heavy pack that's going to last you the whole time. You take only enough to get you to the next point, hopping from one leg of the trip to another with just enough to get you through each segment. In this case, it looks like the provisions ran out because, as Clarke points out, and as is verified in the verse, Hagar and Ishmael got lost. The King James states she wandered. That's a little misleading. She wandered in the wilderness, yes, but the original word was ta'ah, and ta'ah is actually better translated, according to Strong's dictionary, to vacillate or reel or stray. The Amplified Bible adds the word aimlessly to its rendition of this verse. She wandered aimlessly. Clearly, the inference is that she lost her way. Abraham gave her enough if she could have gotten from his compound to the next stopping point, but she got lost. And we can understand that, can't we? This makes far more sense than to think that Abraham half-heartedly and cruelly sent them on their way without enough supplies to sustain them for the entire arduous journey. Though again, the Bible doesn't give us these details, I think we can safely assume this theory is reasonably close to the truth. Abraham gave them enough till they got to their next point. Now, one more quick comment before we move on. There's an odd little statement in this verse that I'd like to clear up. It's led to a little bit of controversy over the years, as well as fueling some nasty criticism from God's enemies. Let me read the whole verse and then highlight the section I'm talking about. It's a very tiny snippet, but it's caused a lot of trouble. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, putting it on her back, and the child, and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, those who hate God want you to see this as nothing but cruelty. They want you to think Abraham and God are misogynistic and uncaring. They want you to believe that not only did Abraham, with God's blessing, just throw those two out, but he came by to callously burden a woman by making her carry provisions as well as her own son on her shoulder, on her back. They'll say, Abraham just handed that bottle and a child to Hagar for her to carry through the desert. And they don't want you to stop and think about it. They just want you to agree angrily and blindly because God and Abraham hate women. Oh, come on, John. Nobody said that. They did. They want you to believe it. Well, it's actually an ignorant, uninformed point. Ishmael's a teenager by this time. Some say as old as 17. If anything, he could have carried Hagar, probably with little effort. And I just don't think it would take more than 90 seconds to figure that out if you wanted to know the truth. We know how old Abraham is when Isaac is born. That's one of the things that happens contemporaneously with this event. In fact, it's the birth of Isaac that set this whole thing in motion. So we know how old Abraham was when Isaac is born because we're told in verse 5, it simply says he's 100. We know how old Abraham was when Ishmael was born because, again, we're told about this over in chapter 16. The last verse of that short chapter says, and Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. That's 86. 86 is 86 years old. Although we don't know exactly how long after the birth of Isaac that Hagar and Ishmael were exiled, if it happened even immediately, well, Ishmael would be 14. And besides, aren't you paying attention? The biggest flaw in this theory is the existence of Isaac. If you insist that Hagar had to carry an infant Ishmael, you're ignoring the timeline and claiming that Isaac and Ishmael are the same age or close to it. We know Isaac is a newborn, at the most a young toddler. The only way you could interpret that verse to mean that Abraham laid Ishmael on her shoulder, you would have to ignore the timeline. You'd have to say, well, he was as young as Isaac. And that's absolutely ludicrous. And yet another example of how desperate the critics of God are, or how little they respect your intelligence, or a serious flaw in their own. But I don't think the critics are unintelligent. However, they are desperate for a victory. So what then does this mean, and the child? What about the child? Well, all I think this means is that Abraham, much like he did with the water, brought the boy to Hagar and laid the responsibility for him on her, not the physical presence, the legal responsibility. Before this, Ishmael was under the supervision, control, and care of his father because his father was the head of the household and the owner of the mother. Harsh reality, but Hagar was Abraham's slave. And as such, everything that's hers belonged to him. Well, that's all changing now legally. Remember early on, it was Sarah who insisted that they legally change the arrangement. Abraham is no longer formally responsible for Ishmael. His mother is. And perhaps this bringing of the child is the symbolic act of that transition. He's handing over the child to his mother. Likely she led him off by the hand. That explains it so much easier than trying to say that Abraham callously and cruelly made her carry the son through the desert. Again, you've got to say, John, nobody says these sorts of things. They do. And they want you to agree with them. It's really shocking, to be honest. But it's not easy being an atheist. They're forever having to come up with one silly idea after another, like evolution, to deny plain scriptural wording. But they persist at the prompting of their master, Satan. And I believe it. I believe that Satan is behind these things, and I'm sure you do too. Anyhow, let's briefly reset the scene. Abraham gives Hagar and Ishmael instructions and provisions. He gives them enough supplies to get them to their next stopover. Surely he's given them sufficient, cold, hard cash to get fresh supplies when those ran out. They were to follow that pattern all the way to their final destination. I'm convinced they would have been just fine if things would have gone to plan. But Mama gets the two of them lost. And look, can we blame her? Of course not. This isn't something she was prepared for. Independence has been thrust upon her all of a sudden. She's likely been a slave all of her life. Someone else has been making the decisions for her. She has always been at the beck and call of someone else telling her where to go. She never had to decide where to go. We can assume she's never been on her own, except that one time way back when she first got pregnant and tried to escape Sarah's wrath. Most likely she had very little knowledge of the world outside the Abrahamic compound. Getting lost in that trackless desert was not a long shot by any means. This wasn't unexpected, nor something we can criticize the Egyptian woman for. Verse 15, and the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under the shrubs, and she went and sat her down over against him, a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. Again, heartbreaking. But we may need to explain a few things. They're lost in a desert. As we said, no one can point fingers. Hagar has not been having a good week. She's distraught and most likely poorly equipped to handle the challenge of transporting herself and her son through a hostile zone. As will happen quickly in places like that, the water runs out. Surely they've been rationing now for a while, so their decline didn't start right at the minute the skin bottle was empty. No doubt by the time it does run dry, they're already severely dehydrated. It looks as if Ishmael is the worst of the two. That's what the impression is that we read. Ishmael seems to be worse off. Now, that might be counterintuitive given the fact that he's, a strapping teenage boy, but let's not forget, he's probably been living like a prince all his life, while his mother, as a slave, was, more used to deprivation and hardship. So Hagar has built up a far greater stamina than the unprepared and privileged boy has. Either way, the end appears near for the both of them. Moses, the writer of Genesis, is really presenting a gripping tale for us. Hagar finds whatever shade she can, and she directs her son to lay down in it. She knows it's really only temporary relief. It seems she's doing her best to give her son as much comfort as she can for his final few hours. And by the way, I don't mean to chuckle, but this is a little bit of a chuckle. The King James says she cast the child under one of the shrubs. It sounds like she chucked him there. It's an unfortunate choice of words, if you ask me. She didn't throw him underneath the bush, when really the picture we're getting in the original is that of a woman whose strength is failing her. We can imagine that Ishmael is all but incapacitated at this point. Mama is probably doing her best to move him to a safer position, but her weakness doesn't allow her to, delicately place him, and she basically plops the boy down with as much energy as her dying body allows. This is an excruciating scene. So once Hagar is satisfied she's done all she can for her dying son, she seeks out her own final resting place. In a moment of what must be unspeakable grief, she says, "Let me not see the death of my child," and picks a spot nearby, but orients her gaze away from her fading boy. Having watched a few loved ones die, I get it. Verse 17, "And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Up, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Now, first of all, I want to make sure that we're clear about what's going on here. One of the gods that gets invented by modern mankind, and this is especially true in the church, the God that the church, among others, invents is a sappy, dangerously indulgent, overly sympathetic first responder type. He's peddled, I really want to say God is marketed as someone who's just waiting over there in the wings to come and make us happy when things don't go our way. Or he's just part of the cleanup crew after we've made a mess out of our lives. Addiction problems? Call 1-800-JESUS-CARES, and all your troubles will simply disappear. Are you lonely? No one answering your Instagram posts? Try #ChristIsComfort, and they'll swing by and make you feel better. That crowd, the crowd that invented that type of God, looks at these two verses and says, just like God sent an angel to comfort Hagar, he'll turn your life around and get you back on your feet. He knows and he cares. Now, of course, I believe God knows and he cares. But for him, if you never hear anything from me, hear this. God's priorities always come first. And unless you're aligned with his agenda, you shouldn't expect anything more than education. God is not going to step in and fix your mess until he's sure that you want to set yourself aside and serve him. This is why we don't have that many people on our YouTube channel, but that's the God the Bible tells us exists. If you want to get clean and sober just so you can get your life back, he's not going to lend a hand. Oh, you're just a cranky old fundamentalist. No one sees God like that anymore. God is love, man. I assume then you don't read your Bible. 1 Peter 3:12. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. I don't do evil. I don't murder anyone. I've never stolen anything in my life. Do you think that makes you not evil? You were born evil. Proverbs 15:29. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he heareth the prayer of the righteous. Isaiah 59:2. But your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. As he's done before, God stepped in to preserve his plan. In this instance, he is not just showing up. He has to stop a key figure in that plan, his redemptive plan, from losing heart. Hagar has clearly given up, and God needs her to gather her strength in order to move things forward. Now, remember what kind of rescue mission this is. This isn't God sending an angel to, pluck her from some form of oppression or unfair treatment. God was behind the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael. He's not regretting that decision. What the angel of God was doing was getting Hagar back on her feet after she got lost. She somehow got confused about Abraham's directions, and she was wandering around in a very inhospitable place. If you want God's help, then you have to be on his agenda. If you're moving about for his glory and for his purposes, God is going to help you. Hagar's bewilderment was leading to despair, which was leading to more bad decision-making, which eventually led her to surrender to what she thought was her fate and the fate of her very important son. That's what God was doing. He was getting this important piece of his redemptive plan back in the game, as it were. This is more about salvaging redemption than rescuing Hagar. The angel said, "What aileth thee?" which may be better translated, "What to thee?" or "What to you?" In other words, what are you so worried about? Where's your courage? It's almost like a mild rebuke. God was concerned when he heard the boy calling out, and so he sent that angel to straighten up his mama. And that's why I caution you about using this story as proof that God always offers a helping hand to the poor. He does that. There's always hope that God will intervene, but you and God have to be working toward the same goal, or at least willing to. All right, that's probably enough for now. There are other things we can talk about in this verse, but how about we save those for next time? See you then.